Memorial Trust formally transferred ownership of the Corner John farmhouse and the surrounding property to the Historical Society. The trust not only preserved the house, but funded a full historical structural restoration and essential updates. We're deeply grateful for their generosity and their vision and confidence in our mission. As Uxbridge's oldest public building and the site of the first town meeting in 1727, the farmhouse is a cornerstone of our local history, and we are honored to be its new stewards. So before we move into the business meeting, we have a very special presentation to share. Many of you know the story of the Taft Tavern on 7th Street, famous as the lodging place of George Washington during his 1789 visit to Uxbridge. The Society is fortunate to already have the Washington bed in our collections. Earlier this year, an extraordinary discovery was made. The original Taft Tavern sign, missing from Uxbridge for well over a century, was located and authenticated. Thanks to the efforts of David Moriarty and the generous donations of Society members, this historic sign has now been returned to Uxbridge. Its acquisition brings together two remarkable artifacts: the bed that George Washington slept in, and the sign that hung outside the tavern. And we reunite them now after 250 years. It's truly a once-in-a-generation moment for the Society. So we're honored to have Dave Moriarty with us today to share the full story, how the sign was found, the journey it took, and how it ultimately made its way to Uxbridge. Please join me in welcoming Dave Moriarty.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hello, everybody. It's been a hectic couple months. You know how things don't come in nicely spaced. They come in big bunches. Well, we were right at the end of trying to get the farmhouse finished. I wanted to finish that project and get it off our hands to give it to the Historical Society before the end of the year. But then this comes up, that comes up, and what comes up? The sign. So I'm going to tell you the story about how the sign was discovered. I'm going to tell you all about it. So let's just get going here. Oops. So the agenda is going to be, the introduction, the missing sign. We're going to talk about Samuel Taft. We're going to talk about President George Washington's surprise visit to Uxbridge. We're going to talk about the history and travels of the Taft Tavern sign. And then finally, we're going to talk about Sherlock Holmes and the case of the missing Taft Tavern sign. So let's start with the introduction, the missing sign. And there's the Taft Tavern. So on Friday, November 6th, in 1789, President George Washington made an unplanned overnight stop at Samuel Taft's Tavern, marking what is now Uxbridge's most celebrated historical event. So this is a really big deal. We got the father of our country, probably one of the most famous historical people in the entire world today, stopped in little Uxbridge as a surprise visit. I mean, it's quite an honor for it. You know, Boston had everybody visit there. But for them to come to Uxbridge, it's a really big deal. And we've been celebrating this for 250 years. So having a sign just in itself, even if George Washington didn't stay here, is a big deal. But having it as part of the place where he stayed overnight, makes it even more special. So I first heard about the sign, and this is really all I knew about the sign right until October. From Uxbridge 250th commemorative book. So this book is from 1977, and it was written by Flo Bodwin and Sandy Rice. Sandy's still with us. And in the book, and I always loved that book, I've been looking at it for 50 years. And in the book was one thing that really perturbed me, this page right here, where they talk about the Taft Tavern Inn, George Washington's visit, the picture of the sign, and not an authentic, but a picture of what George Washington wrote back to Samuel Taft after he left. And here's the picture of the sign, and the caption is, the original sign to hang outside the Taft Tavern on Sutton Street.
Hello.
This sign was sighted in an
That's
antique
a
shop a couple of years ago, which would be 75, for sale at $3,500. That always bugged me. What a shame we don't have this sign in Uxbridge. So that's really all I knew about the sign, and my desire, we really should have that here. So that was 50 years I've been thinking about that. And his bed that George Washington slept in, and the Historical Society, only in the last 10 years, was gifted this bed. This bed went with the family to Natick, and then the family gifted it to the Historical Society, and it was in the farmhouse. It's going to go back in the farmhouse. So that's quite a thing to have that bed that George Washington slept in. But we have an added bonus. The Taft Tavern serving tray. So I'm going to invite Jim up here. And you guys, this is an added bonus that we did not advertise. So last year, descendants of the Tafts that lived in Maine donated the wooden serving tray. Come right over here, Jim, in the light. This is a wooden serving tray, that metal tray that history has it, the Taft family, they said this is what they served George Washington with. And it was gifted to the Historical Society last year. So
it was in the bedroom. No, it was in the bedroom, and a member of the Taft family contacted us and donated it to us. And as far as the provenance goes, I have a friend who used to sleep on the George Washington bed when he was a little kid. Wilmington, if anybody knows that. And he swears that this was there when he was sleeping there. And there's actually newspaper articles about it earlier in the century. So, here it is.
all right, so we're getting more and more stuff back. So let's talk now about Samuel Taft. So Samuel Taft was originally from Upton, Massachusetts, born in September of 1735. Samuel was the son of Israel and Mercy Taft, both of whom were from Mendon. Samuel's grandfather, Robert Taft Jr., was the first selectman of Uxbridge. He was the first of 5 elected selectmen at the first town meeting, which was held at the Corner John Farmhouse on July 25th, 1727. Actually, the farmhouse held the first 2 town meetings at the farmhouse. Samuel's great-grandfather, Robert Taft Sr., was the first Taft to migrate to the colonies, and he settled in Mendon in 1680. Samuel married Mary Murdoch on December 16, 1758, and they had a total of 18 children, of whom only 10 reached adolescence. In 1774, Samuel purchased 2 parcels of land in Uxbridge from Samuel Reed, located on the country road to Douglas. While the smaller house existed on the property at the time of the purchase, the present house was constructed between 1774 and 1778. Mary Murdoch Taft died in 1785, after 28 years of marriage. And then on January 9th, 1786, experienced who became Samuel's second wife. And together they had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters.
What is he, a horse?
During the Revolutionary War, Samuel
he's
Taft was
potent.
often tasked to supply Uxbridge's Continental Army soldiers with critical food, clothing, and other necessities. And Samuel joined Captain Thaddeus Reed's company in Colonel Nathan Tyler's regiment, serving as a private. This service was brief, lasting only 10 days. The company marched to Tiverton, Rhode Island on July 28, 1780. So here's in the Prospect Hill Cemetery, road, if you were going this old section, 37 rows back, right up against the road, that broken grave is his grave, and next to it is the grave of his second wife, Experience. And alongside of them is 2 of their sons, and Samuel's daughter-in-law, Mary, and then there's 4 grandchildren buried there too. And this shows you the proximity of the grave to the front house, wasn't it? He's buried there, and a lot of his possessions are going to be right in the front house, or inside of his grave.
Oh, wow.
And this is the Taft Tavern today. Now we have Mrs. Black. You stand up. She's the current owner of the Taft Tavern. Very nice. So now let's talk about President George Washington's death. So Washington was inaugurated on April 30th at 1789 at Federal Hall in New York City. So at the time he was 58 years old, and he was a veteran of the French and Indian War, and of course the American Revolution, and he had to leave his beautiful plantation to come up here. He did so reluctantly. He was a reluctant politician, and they came up here and knew the importance of getting this new government started. So between his inauguration and his October trip to the northern states, he was busy forming the executive branch of our government and trying to figure out how this was all going to work, how they were going to collect taxes. I mean, they were very busy. And during that time, he got really sick. He got a large tumor on his hip, I think, in which they operated, which was very, very bad then because they didn't have the antibiotics that we have now, and you could really come down with infection very easily. He was laid up for like 3 months, trying to form a government, having endless line of visitors that wanted to have an audience with him, and so he was pretty sick during that summer. Also during that summer, his mother passed away of breast cancer. So it was a trying time. But he knew that he wanted to visit the people. He wanted to be a president of the people and not make them think that they just crowned another king. He wanted to be among the people. So he sent letters to friend info. Jefferson, Hamilton weren't necessarily his friends, John Adams, and he said, what do you think of this idea that I toured the 13 colonies? And they all came back and said they thought it was a good idea. And so he waited until Congress was supposed to go on a vacation to do his trip. So the New England tour, this map comes from Nathan Philbrook's book, and the tour was from October 15th to November 3rd. It took him until November 10th to get home. So basically, he started off from New York and he went to New Haven. Now he could have gone the lower coast road, which would have run through Rhode Island, but he wanted to avoid that because Rhode Island hadn't ratified the Constitution yet, so he wanted to send them a message. So instead he went the upper coast road. Don't worry, he went to Rhode Island the next year. He made a special trip to Newport and Providence when they ratified their Constitution. So he took the upper coast road, which brought him to Hartford, brought him up to Springfield, Worcester, and then on to Boston. And now this was all planned, this whole trip, all the way up to Maine. He had advanced men go up, sent letters. They knew he was coming. And he had three soldiers with him. One soldier would ride as a point man, then there'd be two more soldiers on horseback. And then he had a white wagon that was drawn by 4 horses. He had 2 slave boys. One rode the team, the other one was taking care of his horse, pulling his stallion. And what he would do was, and he had a guy riding in the wagon, driving the wagon, who was an old, I think it was one of the secretaries, but he was a very able soldier from the Revolutionary War, so Washington knew that he ever needed security, that was the guy that had with him. And what he would do, he would come to a town, he would stop before he rode into the town, because they had all kinds of speeches and dinners and everything planned for him, and he would get on his uniform, and he'd get up on his stallion. Now his stallion was really something. It was 16 hands high. They would wax it down with some sort of moisturizer every night. They'd brush its teeth, they'd rinse its mouth, and they'd paint its hooves like gloss black. And he would ride on top of it. This is an imposing guy at the time. He was 6'2", which was very unusual back then. And he had his uniform on, and his saddle blanket was leopard skin with gold trim. So it was very, with his sword and everything, it was quite the spectacle. So he'd get on, before he rode into town, he'd get on his horse and he'd lead the way. And it's a great fanfare. So he went to Boston, and then he went on up the coast, all the way to Kittery, Maine. And that was really the conclusion of his tour. Now, without advancement, and without any notice, he took the way home, and he wanted to get home very quickly. He had enough of this. He needed to get back to New York. So all his trip home was totally unannounced. They didn't know there was no advancement. They didn't know he was coming. So he rode down this way to Watertown. Then he took the Middle Coast Road, which came right through Uxbridge. So we're going to talk about this portion of the trip. Started in Watertown. He spent the night in Watertown. That was Thursday, November 5th. He stayed in Watertown. And then he made his way to Uxbridge. And after that, he went to Ashford, Connecticut. And then on to Hartford. So I'm going to use George Washington's own words about this section of the trip. This is out of his diaries from July 1786 to December 1789. So Friday the 6th, a little after 7 o'clock, under great appearances of rain or snow, we left Watertown, and passing through Needham, 5 miles therefrom, breakfast at Sherborne, which is 14 miles from the former. Then passing through Halston, 5 miles, Milford 6 more, Menden 4 more, and Uxbridge 6 more. We lodged at one Taft's, 1 mile further, the whole distance of this day's travel being 36 miles. From Watertown till you get near Needham, the road is very level. About Needham, it is hilly, then level again, and the whole pleasant and well cultivated till you pass Sherborne. Between this and Halston is some hilly and rocky ground, as there is in places. Onwards to Uxbridge, some of which are very bad. Upon the whole, they may be called an indifferent road, diversified by good and bad land, cultivated and in the woods, some high and barren, and other low, wet, and piney. Grass and Indian corn is the chief produce of the farms. Rye composes a part of the culture of them, but wheat is not grown on account of the blight. The roads in every part of the state are amazingly crooked to suit the convenience of every man's fields, and the directions received from the people equally blind and ignorant. So Washington was obviously a little cranky at this point. The clouds of the morning vanished before meridian sun, and the afternoon was bright and pleasant. The house in Uxbridge had a good external appearance for a tavern, but the owner of it being from home and the wife sick, we could not gain admittance, which was the reason of my coming on to Taft's, where, though the people were obliging, the entertainment was not very inviting. So here is a little bit of a historical conundrum, right? Everyone knows the story about Taft being turned away at the Amington Tavern in Mendon, right? This is the thing that I grew up with. I grew up in Mendon, so, we were the town that wouldn't let George Washington stay there. But Washington wrote that he was turned away from a tavern in Uxbridge. So there were two other taverns in Uxbridge before the Tafts. There was the Elijah Wood Tavern in Rice City, where that's a lot of people. Elijah Wood was one of the sons of what do they call it? Sons of Liberty, and then there was the Spring Tavern. So he would have had to go by those two taverns to get to Tafts. So was it really one of those two taverns, or was it the Mendon Tavern? We're going to talk about this for a little bit. And are there any people from Mendon here? Good. Because might be some people here that might get really, really annoyed with this part of the presentation. So, now there may be more, but the first I could find in writing of George Washington getting turned away in Mendon was in this address by Henry Chapin at the Unitarian Church in 1864. He did the history of Uxbridge, and it was turned into a publication right after he died in the 1880s, plus some more added on to it. So Henry Chapin was originally from Upton, and he practiced law in Uxbridge for about 9 years, and then he went on to Worcester, and he was a 3-term mayor of Worcester. And I believe he was the mayor of Worcester when he gave this address. But here's what he had to say about the Amington Tavern story. This is so the first thing in the book says, this is his own speech now. There is a circumstance related to me by a venerable clergyman just a few weeks since. So in other words, someone just told him this story. So that tells me that it wasn't in writing yet. Otherwise, he would have read it. And which may be interesting to you. George Washington called at the house of Colonel Amington in Mendon, whom he had known in the Revolutionary Army, but not finding him at home, passed on his way to Uxbridge. Soon after he had retired, meaning gone to bed in the Taft Tavern, Colonel Amington, accompanied by his daughter, arrived, both being very anxious to see the president. To the surprise of his attendants, he arose and, attired in his dressing gown, had a very pleasant interview with his old friend and daughter. At the close of the interview, said the general to Miss Abington, "Allow me to ask you one question. You have come a long ways to see an old man. How far would you have gone to see a young one?" Now, was this true? I don't know. Evidently, this was just told to Chapin a few weeks before he made the speech. And the story I always heard as a kid was that General Washington showed up in the dark of a wet and stormy night and wanted to go into the Amington Tavern, and the housemaid turned him away because they were too dirty and muddy, and she had no idea who he was. So he went on to Taft's. That was the story I heard when I was a kid. So whether these stories about him going to Mendon, or what he says, he says in his own words, he went to another tavern in Uxbridge, and the tavern keeper was gone, the wife was sick, so he went on to Taft's. We'll never really know what happened. The same story was relayed in a 1908 booklet written by Sarah Taft, who was at the time the owner of the Taft Tavern, and obviously a descendant. And she wrote it for the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter, the Deborah Wheelock chapter. And they published it, reprinted it again in, I think, 1928. And in that, she basically tells the same story that Chapin tells in his book. And as a matter of fact, in the footnotes at the end of her pamphlet, she makes a correction to what Chapin said. You know, she has a footnote, so I know she was reading his book, you know. So here's a picture of the Amington Tavern in Mendon. You're probably all familiar with it, it's still there. It's in great shape. Looks the same as it did. This is probably like 1940s. It looks basically the same as I've always remembered it. And it's on Main Street. It's right there at the Four Corners in Mendon. So Washington left Uxbridge, and he went through the Douglas Forest. So that would be it would be southwest Main Street in Douglas. You know, that part that they just only tarred in the last 10 years. That brings you to Thompson, Connecticut. And he went by at he went just north of the tri-state marker, only by a couple hundred yards. And there was a tavern there and a toll booth house. The tavern was the Brass Ball Tavern. The cellar hole is still right there for that tavern, right next to the road. And there was a toll there too. And they have a missing sign. The toll sign is around, and someone owns it in North Carolina. I know the people at the Thompson Historical Society are looking for that. But he stopped at a tavern in Thompson, right at the Speedway. You know when you go to the Speedway, the Speedway is on your left, and some golf courses there on your right. Up on the hill, there's a marker, and that's the tavern where George Washington, he would rise early, and he wouldn't eat breakfast where he was staying. He'd get up and be out before dawn sometimes, and he would go a few miles and stop for breakfast. And he stopped for breakfast at that tavern in Thompson. The building was torn down in the early 1900s. But then he went through Putnam. And one of the reasons he chose this route was because he wanted to see General Putnam. But when he got to Putnam and he found out that Putnam was like, General Putnam's house was like 5 miles out of the way, he decided, no, I want to keep going. I'm not going to go 10 miles round trip to see the general. So he went to Ashford, and that's where he stayed on Saturday, November 7th, 1789, and the 8th. And the reason he stayed there 2 nights was because it was really frowned upon in Connecticut at the time to travel during the Sabbath. And so he had a miserable time in Ashford. The place was so poor that they only served him water and crackers. That's all they had. And they gave him they served him crackers and hot water, and they gave him a broken pewter spoon to eat. And he complained, can't you give me a good spoon? And so they went next door to the parsonage and got him a silver spoon. They brought him and he ate. And then he complains in his diaries that he heard the same terrible sermon twice. So he left Ashford and he went to Hartford. And somewhere during this journey here, he sent a letter to Samuel Taft, and we all heard about this letter. He also sent 2 bowls of chins, which was like a printed cotton cloth. And he sent 5 gold guineas. That's King George II Guinea's descent. And he wrote this letter. Now, I was always interested in this letter. On my paper route in Mendon, there was the Goss family, and they were an elderly couple, and she was a descendant of the Tafts. And I remember after I moved to Uxbridge in '79, they were creating the Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor. And I remember there was a newspaper article way back then when they were creating the corridor that said that Mrs. Goss, a descendant of the Taft family, donated this letter to the Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor. And I said, where is it? You know, I wonder where the letter is. And while we were fixing the farmhouse in the last 3 or 4 months, I was over there doing something, and in comes unannounced John Wise with the new executive director of the Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor. And this, I asked this nice young lady, I said, geez, you know, I've always been wondering about this letter, and I described what it was all about and everything. And she said, well, they're not a government entity anymore. The Blackstone Valley Heritage Corridor is not a government entity before. They became a private, nonprofit entity. And when we did that, anything like that letter that people gave us, we gave to the government. And so I found on the National Archives that the letter ended up there. Because here's an actual picture of the letter. It was in their archives. And so I was glad to see that. You know, at least it didn't get lost or something. You know, a lot of this stuff can take a walk. And here's what he wrote to Samuel Taft. Sir, being informed that you have given my name to one of your sons, and called another after Mrs. Washington's family, and being moreover very much pleased with the modest and innocent looks of your 2 daughters, Patty and Polly, I do for these reasons send each of these girls a piece of chins, and to Patty, who bears